you're my life. I'm Felix, and these aren't just headlines and hit songs. These are my days, my stories, and hey, maybe yours too. Let's dig into 1973. For me personally, 1973 was kind of a, I'll say it, shit show. That was my first year in junior high school, 7th grade, and that's how Lindenhurst did things. He did 1st through 6th, then 7th and 8th in junior high school, and the rest of it in high school. So this was my first year in junior high school, and as I've stated in previous videos, I was very passive because that was what my father demanded of me. In addition to that, one of my mother's favorite sayings didn't help, and that was whenever you didn't really feel like eating something, she would say, "It's not what you like that makes you fat, it's what you get." Well, she was successful because she made me the chubby little passive kid. But anyway, before we get too deep into any of that, let's talk about 1973. Now, the big song of 1973 was the kind of debut song of Tony Orlando and Dawn. And it was "Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree."
Whoa, tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree.
I love that song. Not a lot of people would be willing to say that today, but I love that song today. Also, one of the big things in 73 was that basically the rock music world shifted. It shifted on its axis, and it shifted hard when Pink Floyd released Dark Side of the Moon.
Money.
A concept album in some ways, but it was a whole new kind of rock. I mean, it was just a completely different scene for the rock and roll world. Here are some of the other songs that were big that year.
I remember when rock was young. You're so vain, very superstitious. I've been really trying, baby, trying to hold back this feeling.
So now, I was 12 that year until November. And music had kind of started to speak to me in new ways. And being the passive, chubby kid, I used to spend a lot of kid time in my room, listening to music, listening to the radio. I had a cassette player. Ooh. I had a turntable. And that was the year that I also discovered Jesus Christ Superstar. It was the year that the movie came out, and I became obsessed. Today, to this day, I have seen it on Broadway. I have seen no less than 3 movie versions of it. I've seen the live on NBC, and I have listened to 4 different cast albums. It's like an obsession for me. Kind of the way Wicked has gotten these days for me, but I don't want to get too much off onto that rabbit trail. So I was listening to Jesus Christ Superstar and some of the previous songs I talked about. And in my home, my father was playing pretty much the same stuff he always played. My sister, my oldest sister, was also kind of obsessed with Superstar. And we used to talk about it. And even at me being 12 and her being 21. But the big news for me was in the movies. Now, I have to give you a little kind of background here. My father had introduced me to horror movies at a very young age. But he had introduced me to Frankenstein and The Wolfman and movies like that, Dracula. And then as time went on, he would kind of show me other horror movies. Well, 12 years old, I went to the movies with him and my mom, and we went to see The Exorcist.
I cast you out! Unclean spirit!
Shove it up your ass!
12 years old. Now, my father had made it very clear to me in previous introductions to horror movies that none of this is real. This is all made up. These people are actors. They're not really dying. They're not really monsters. There are no monsters, so on and so forth. And then I was exposed to The Exorcist, which was a whole new world of horror movie. Nobody had ever done anything like this. And there was one scene specifically that really kind of got to me. It's near the beginning of the movie, and Reagan, Linda Blair, starts flopping up and down on the bed. And then when she stops, she flings herself back onto the bed, and her throat expands. I don't know why. Can't explain it to you. But that kind of turned my stomach a little bit. The rest of the movie, I was fine with. I never had bad dreams after this movie. As a matter of fact, there's only one movie that's ever given me bad dreams, and we'll be talking about that in some distant video. But yeah, that was my experience with The Exorcist at 12 years old. Parental discretion advised. Some of the other movies that happened that year were Enter the Dragon, with Bruce Lee, which pretty much introduced Bruce Lee to the United States. Unfortunately, we lost Bruce Lee later that same year. There was American Graffiti.
You got three choices. One, you chicken out. In that case, I let ants tie you to the car and drag you around a little bit, and you don't want that, right?
Which spawned a whole craze of 50s living. And Serpico. The true story of Frank Serpico, a New York City cop who exposed graft and injustice in the New York City Police Department.
What are you doing? Oh, Christ.
On TV, my father was watching, and it was always my father. My father had control of the remote. Well, me being the remote, because I used to have to get up and go turn it down. But it was, my father loved Hawaii Five-0. Bonanza. Occasionally on Sundays he would watch the World of Disney. But the new shows that came on that he was watching were Kojak and the $6 Million Man.
Looks good at NASA on. Roger. BCS arm switch is on. Okay, Victor. Landing rocket arm switch is on. Here comes the throttle. Circuit breakers in. We have separation. Roger.
Colonel Steve Austin. We can make him better than he was. On Saturday mornings, I started watching Schoolhouse Rock.
Conjunction, junction, what's your function?
Conjunction, junction, what's your function? Now to the less happy side of 1973. The Watergate scandal was in full bloom. Nixon had just gotten reelected in 72, and he was still not fully involved or not fully engulfed in this scandal. He fired all of the Department of Justice heads so that he could maybe keep himself out of it. As we all know, that didn't work out very well for him. One of the biggest things that happened in 1973 was Roe v. Wade passed. And the women in the United States finally had some say over their own bodies. I don't want to get too deep into that as to where that's gone now, but it happened in 73. The United States signed the Paris Peace Accords, ostensibly ending the war in Vietnam, or the U.S.'s involvement in it anyway. In what was a big blow to the Nixon administration, his vice president, Spiro Agnew, was ousted because of tax evasion. And probably something that most of you will remember from this year, though maybe not the biggest story of the year, it's definitely the one that probably sticks out in most people's minds. And it was very simply that the OPEC nations had a lot of problems with the Yom Kippur War and how it was handled. So they shut down oil production and shut down shipping of oil to a lot of countries, one of them being the United States. And we went to gas rationing. I'm sure many of you who are my age or older remember the lines at the gas station, the odd and even days that were determined by the last number or the last digit on your license plate. The year started with gas at 39 cents a gallon. By the end of it, gas was almost twice that, and it was being rationed. As I mentioned earlier, we lost Bruce Lee that year. Jim Croce, one of my favorite singers probably ever, passed away that year in a plane crash. I mentioned earlier the horror movie The Wolfman. Well, the man who played him, the man who brought the Wolfman to life, Lon Chaney Jr., was lost that year. And probably what most would consider the biggest loss was the loss of Lyndon B. Johnson, the former president of the United States. Now, in sporting news, and I don't always do this, but these were a couple of pretty big things. The Miami Dolphins put together the very first perfect football season. And Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs met on a tennis court and had the Battle of the Sexes, in which Billie Jean King pretty much routed Bobby Riggs. So yeah, that was my 1973. It was a tough time for me personally. It was a tough time for our country. And some things that happened that year, we still haven't recovered from. So tell me, what do you remember from 1973? What stories stick in your head? What songs stick in your head? Till next week, I'm Felix. And this is the story of my life.